You know, our role in life is to help grease the wheels of innovation. We act as a strongly funded arm of the Technology Strategy Board, supporting all of the competitions and running our own communities. My particular interests are in ICT, so software engineering is currently at the top of my head, stuff around data exploration, about to do some work in user experience as well. So activities, events, themes around that, competitions that come in behind, and there's a very wide array of competitions and funding available from the Technology Strategy Board. I'm sure will come up later on as well. So the move to one knowledge transfer network, which was accomplished in April, basically gives us 15 or so different communities to work across, and it's very much in the way that Tony just referred to, the opportunity to innovate across boundaries. It's been wisely said elsewhere that innovation often takes place at the intersection between ideas and technology domains, and that's one of the core rationales for us doing this, as well as getting some more efficiency and scale as well. So that's me.
So we're a very, very simple company. We build the world's fastest broadband networks in rural England only. We'll never do towns and cities. We basically invest 2/3 of all our private money in digging holes in the ground and making a mess for a couple of months of the year. And then we put all the roads and the pavements, etc. back together, and we put a fibre optic connection at every single property in every community we build. So we have about 15 villages connected in southwest Oxfordshire at the minute. Our plan is to build to another 5,500 to 6,000 properties in Oxfordshire over the next 2 years. And we give everyone that's connected to the network a connection that runs at 1,000 megabits per second up and down. So it's very simple. It's ultra-fast broadband.
I'm William Cotton. I'm the chairman of Canary Care. And I've spent about 25 years in healthcare and personal care developing products, and more recently have been focused on the elderly and looking at products and services that could help the elderly to live in their own homes for longer. And there's a particular gap and a need in the market for products that can improve the quality of care for elderly people, but also reduce costs and make lives of carers a little bit better. And that helped us in the development of a product called Canary, which is a monitoring system to support elderly in their own homes. And what Canary is you have a number of sensors that are small sensors that you place around the house of an elderly person. And they monitor temperature, movement, and visitors. And we gather all of the data from that and make that available on a personal portal to families, and then send messages by text or email if there's a problem. So if I just show you what that portal looks like, what the family gets access to is a whole wealth of data that they can dig into in as much detail as they like, understanding what time that Granny got up and what time maybe the care worker came round when they visited. But the clever bit about it is that we send out these text and email messages to let you know if anything out of the ordinary occurs. So you might choose to program the system for your mother to say that actually she tends to have a breakfast between 10 o'clock and 11:30. I'll set up a rule that if she doesn't go into the kitchen during that time, you will get a text message. So it's quite simple, but it allows families to remotely keep an eye on elderly relatives. And the response has been terrific. So consumers who've used it, we only launched the product last month, but consumers who've used the product so far have given us a terrific response. It's particularly valuable to families and to carers, but there's also a value to public sector and local authorities who are picking up an increasing burden of the care. So yeah, do have a look after this. Do have a look at us come and chat to us. We're in the digital cluster zone across the way. I've got a stand there. And if there are any investors, we're hoping in the next 3 weeks to close our investment round.
I think when I first started out, which was 11 years ago, about 10 years ago, I took a heavily discounted property which the City Council lets out. Not many people know about it, like a lot of the support that's in the city, but down on K Street near St Clement's, we've got a unit with lots of very, very low rent units within it. And I was there with a few other companies, one of which was in Kuna. We both started out with just sort of 3 people. And in Kuna is now a digital agency employing a similar number of people to me, and we've grown to 30 people as well. That sort of support in this city is great. Probably what's missing is the visibility. I don't think a lot of people know that exists. I think that there's a huge amount of support which I am only now becoming aware of. In fact, each time I speak to somebody in the city and the county, you lift up a stone and there's a load more support there that people can access. And it's only through me having individual conversations with people you start to build a picture of it. But I think it's largely invisible. So I think that the visibility of the sport is a big key factor at the moment. I suppose the other thing that's really good that wasn't around when I was starting out was the digital scene has really flourished. So Oxford Geek Nights, which if you don't know what a geek night is, it's an evening where software developers and designers will come together and hear inspiring talks about technology from each other. And it's a great place for ideas to get swapped, and it's exactly what's needed if you want to breathe some life into a digital economy like this. That sort of networking event, and that's been running in Oxford for many years now, and is one of the best attended and oldest running geek nights in the country. And that's where that's where we pick our staff up from. That's where we build our reputation within our industry. So that's a great part of the scene here. And there's so much more, which again, I think speaking to a few of the other panellists here earlier on today, isn't necessarily visible. People don't know it's here.
Yeah, so my experience is different in that I started much more recently. So I moved from London to Oxford 2 years ago to start Educate. And I wasn't aware of any startup culture in Oxford particularly. There is a culture in London that you can hear about called Tech City, and that's where all the buzz is. But there isn't really one in Oxford. In fact, I was talking to someone in London, a potential investor, and he was saying, well, why are you in Oxford? As if you had to have an extraordinarily good reason not to be in London. And yet, actually, if you think about kind of Stanford and Harvard, internationally, Oxford should be a place of enormous kind of fertility of startups, shouldn't it? There should be startups kind of coming out everywhere, all over the place. We've got 30,000 young graduates coming out, well, 10,000 a year from Brookes and from Oxford, the brightest graduates in the country, some of them, and yet we don't have them, or it seems. I was at university, but I'm relatively recently back, and it doesn't seem like they're setting up businesses here. And I was thinking about a couple of reasons why this might be, and firstly, as Dave said, it's visibility. So they automatically think, oh, I've got to go to London, I've got to go to London, that's where I've got to go. Visibility is part of the problem, but also there does need to be some kind of basic facilities that would really help. Now, tech startups don't tend to need much in terms of equipment. They need desk space, and they need a bit of kind of cheap office space. That's all they need, really. Good broadband desk space. Now, one thing that would be great would be some co-working space provided, kind of subsidised at cost rate or something for startups. So perhaps for the first year or something, you can get discounted rates, and mentors can come in and link with that. I mean, I started just renting a desk from Dave a couple of years ago before moving to a larger office, and it was absolutely invaluable. And through that, I met some other startups, and we've kind of set up our own co-working and kind of startup scene, but that's not really been through any official channel. And the other thing is advice. It's absolutely essential as a startup, especially for me as a sole founder, to address your areas of weakness. So I know certain things I'm good at and certain things I'm not good at, and to address them I need experts, people who are a couple of years down the line. So Dave, for example, has been advising me on tech, so IT and that kind of thing, and I've got an advisor who's a non-exec director now in sales and marketing. These kind of things really, really help startups, and there really should be an Oxford kind of mentoring scheme where people from more successful businesses, and I'm sure among the audience there are many of you here, can advise someone 2 years earlier. And so perhaps I could advise someone just starting out, because I've made many, many mistakes that I've learnt from, but I could help someone not make those mistakes in the first place, which would enable them to grow faster, which would then enable Oxford to benefit. And I think that those three things, some affordable and well-publicised desk space, good visibility for the students and for other people wanting to set up businesses, and thirdly for a good mentorship scheme, I think that would really, really help things.
So that's, it's an interesting aspect of growing, a rapidly growing business in rural Oxfordshire. Now the other aspect is from our customers' perspective, particularly from the digital and media companies. So we have a surprising number of small medium enterprises in the villages that we serve. People that run a business from home, work from home, or work for a larger company but want to spend more time at home. But also there's a lot of very small rural business parks. The story's the same everywhere we go, in everywhere we've talked to and connected to. The business parks are half empty because businesses will not go there because they cannot thrive and operate when they've only on the end of a 1 or 2 megabit copper line. And if they want fibre, it's £100,000 start-up cost to get fibre delivered to them because the infrastructure is so scarce in these areas. So we have some really interesting digital media companies, from companies like William Martin Productions in the middle of nowhere in Tubney. They were desperate to get our connectivity because they've now built a global data network connecting their 3 global sites together. As an immediate company, they rely on being able to share high bandwidth files, large files, graphics, videos, etc., for their customers, so that each of their offices can benefit from what each other office is doing. We've got a company in Farmore called Indigo Dingo. I don't know whether he's here, but they're running the video production here. They're a really interesting case study. So they do professional videos for news stories, but primarily for the major corporates, Red Bull, Sony, etc., etc. So they are extremely high bandwidth files. And what he has to do is basically do the production and then drive to London to go and find an office space to upload the film. When we went live in Appleton, he was then driving from his home village, parking outside the pub in Appleton that had 1,000 megabits on Wi-Fi, doing his upload, and then driving home again in order to meet the deadlines. Now, he's happy to share this information with you. He can now take on more work in more high definition and 4K technology because he has, the ability to upload these enormous files from his house. It's phenomenal, and we've got all sorts of graphic designers, marketing companies, media companies that are thriving in the areas that we've built because connectivity it's crucial. It's as crucial as electricity to these companies. And the second aspect is with a fibre network, without banging on about the technology, but the key differentiator that fibre brings is it's symmetric, so uploads are as fast as downloads. And again, if you're a media company or high tech, but primarily media, you have got to be able to deliver what you've created, what you're working on, to your customers or to your partners. And again, we've got examples of customers in some of the villages that, one of our customers is the designer that did all the work for the big event in Glasgow recently. Thank you. Yeah, but he'd have to start uploading those images 2 days before the deadline because he knew it was going to take 18 to 24 hours to upload, and quite often the upload would fail and have to start again. Now it's real time. It takes a few seconds to upload hundreds of megabytes of data.
Okay. I was a little surprised not to hear from you guys, and maybe it is a problem for you, but you didn't mention it. Skills shortage. We employ about 70 software developers and electronics engineers, and we have huge problems with recruitment. We just cannot find people of sufficient skills, and when we do, they often can't afford to come and live in Oxford, which is another huge problem. So housing is a big issue for us. And the skills availability. I was interested in your comment about the university because there may be 10,000 people coming out of there every year, but I feel there's a real disconnect between the university and the industries in Oxford. They're just don't seem to come and find us, and when we go to try and find them, it's really hard. And Said is probably the sort of noble exception to all of that, but the rest of the university I find really difficult to reach. I don't know what you guys think about that.
And I think one of the I think the solution to a lot of this is about getting the excitement going around the digital scene. If you're leaving a university in the city, you don't think about staying here. So if it's an exciting place that feels like there's some momentum around the tech startup scene where people can see stuff happening, they're much more likely to start looking here for opportunities. And within Digital Oxford, a big part of what we're going to be doing is trying to bring some liquidity to the jobs market here by letting our members advertise for free the jobs that are going on, perhaps putting a CV search in there so you can actually look for people, proactively look for people. And I've got ideas around whether or not we could have an Oxfordshire milk round. We take the scene here around to all the universities in the country, not just the two that are here, and say, come here, it's great. Can't solve the housing problem, but
somebody needs to.
But overall, I think TSB grants are a very useful tool. You don't get any technical direction from TSB. They're just monitoring you to make sure you're not wasting taxpayers' money, but they're not going to tell you the answer to some difficult technical or business challenge. The monitoring officer is your friend, but he's also just trying to make sure you're following the plan you said you were going to follow and that you're spending your money in the way you said you were going to. Now, the European Space Agency, ESA, have a number of funding schemes. I'm going to talk about the integrated applications promotion. We've had both a feasibility study through IAP and we're just starting on a demonstration project through IAP. Now, a very different type of process. ESA has, in the IAP program, a kind of always open call, so you can come with any idea. It doesn't have to be in a particular technical area. And so this is good because you've got flexibility, but you then will start to engage in quite a protracted negotiation as you prepare your application. You'll get lots of good advice from ESA, but it takes a lot of time. You do a lot of paperwork. Your application, your proposal could be 60 to 100 pages of information, and they'll give you a format to follow, but they will then micromanage your final proposal to make sure that every page has got the right information on and they question at every point. And so you go through a lot of discussion, iteration, review, change, challenge, just to get to the point where you might get your award of your grant. And I think I can understand why they do it, because they're entering into a contract with you, and they also have a different approach to TSB, and that ESA will, in the IAP programme, they will retain the rights to some of the IP that you're developing, although they probably won't commercialise it. In principle, they could do. So it's a much more legalistic process, and there's a lot of detail that has to be done before you sign that contract with ESA. Now, for us, we had a few problems with our feasibility study in that it took probably 9 months from the initial indication that we were going to get funded to actually starting the project. And those were 9 months where we weren't getting any money from ESA, but we were spending a lot of time talking to them about the project, about the structure of the programme, about some legal issues with some of our partners. And it was very complicated. And we almost gave up a couple of times because we thought, is it actually worth it to go through all this stuff before we actually know whether our idea is going to be commercial? So you've got to be prepared to take that, make that effort up front, if you like, with ESA. Now the good point is that they have got some experienced people in ESA. They know how a good project plan should look, so they will challenge you to make sure your plan is sensible. They'll also challenge you in a business case to make sure you've got some ideas about where it's going to go. I have to say they're perhaps more used to dealing with hardware projects than in application projects, so I think it's something they're potentially learning to deal with these sort of downstream projects in a slightly different way. But they do give you rigour, they challenge you up front, they make you think about what you're doing, and eventually you might get a contract signed with them. So I think I was just trying to contrast with the two different types of R&D grant we've been involved in, both good for different types of reasons. We've had success in TSB and with ESA. Some of our TSB projects are probably going to be commercialised quicker than the ESA ones, but that's probably more of our issue than the grant process itself. I hope that's useful. I'm happy to, in the discussion later on, answer any further questions about our experiences.
Very strong. The largest student society in the country is Oxford Entrepreneurs. something like 7,000 members. So so my name's Tony Hart. I'm helping to drive some of the Network Navigator teams. And one of the guys in our team, Mark Evans, is one of the key guys that's driving a lot of the entrepreneurship and networking pieces within the county. So Future Business Entrepreneurs Drinks happens every other month. And we're doing a lot to encourage and work with organisations like Side Business School with the Launchpad, opening that up to Oxfordshire as a whole. And I must say I agree with what David said about what's happening in Harwell at the moment. There's some phenomenal entrepreneurial activity happening there. So yes, completely agree with you. And even down to the schools level, there's an organisation called OBX, which is driving entrepreneurship within the schools. And some of the stuff that's coming out of Activate Learning, which is the combined colleges within Oxfordshire as well. So really great things happening, but absolutely we need to tell the world about it more. We need to make it more visible and get it more connected into the business community around the place.
Series of knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer programs, so supporting companies to run a business. I think the key observation that we found are two key observations. One, a company often doesn't think to look at a university. They may be situated next door to a university, but just don't think that that expertise is there. They don't know where to go if they do think of it. Often universities are quite difficult to navigate. I know the universities are doing a lot to try and overcome that. I think it is still a barrier. I think the second issue is there's a great perception that companies and universities work to different timescales. They obviously have different drivers. How do you make sure that you balance those different drivers in a particular project? And how do you build up trust in a relationship? You can't just throw people in a room together and expect something to happen. One of the schemes that I am a very passionate supporter of is the Knowledge Transfer Partnership Scheme, which is run by the Technology Strategy Board. It provides funding to help a company to recruit a graduate to work on a project that's of strategic importance. The admin side of that is actually carried by the university, so they employ the graduate, they provide a supervisor for the project, and I would strongly recommend looking at the Knowledge Transfer Partnership Scheme if you want to work at the university. It's a very well managed programme, and from my experience we've seen some really good collaborations moving forward from that initial seed project.
Well, we're actually trying to connect the dots. Normally we will start with a company because I believe that successful projects should involve an SME or a large company, but then there are opportunities where university really help. And we have a fantastic network of content there, so we can find partners, and you might be lucky, or you can find a great academic institution next door and have contacts, but sometimes you really need to go a little bit further, and it's easier with the knowledge transfer network, and you should remember we are a free service to industry thanks to the Technology Strategy Board. So I guess, yes, well, my answer is simple. We absolutely support collaborations between industry and academics, and we are very keen to help those collaborations happening. So if anyone has a practical need to find partners, whether industrial collaborative partners from academia, well, the KTN would be a good start.
The kind of foundations that are being laid are putting us in a very good position for the future. So all of the things in a good cluster that David touched upon, I think we're starting to get in place. It's great to see ESA, RALSpace, ourselves, the Catapult, as sort of big sort of institutional organisations to some extent. What we're really starting to see now is the growth of SMEs, of bigger businesses coming around that are really going to start to spin up that cluster. So the exciting thing that's really going to take the cluster off is when you get the cooperation on one hand, but competition the next day. So companies starting to work together, to compete with each other, to push each other to the next level. I think that's what's going to really drive things. Then at the top and the bottom, I think David again mentioned, we really need customers and people that are going to be challenging the cluster to deliver the best for the UK, that's going to help the UK and particularly the Harwell cluster to step up to the next level, produce the world-beating products that are then going to allow us to export in a nice virtuous circle then that allows these companies to continue to grow. And at the bottom, no top or bottom meant in a positive or negative sense, but from the links to academia, all of the other factors that are driving the cluster. How do we strengthen the links with Oxfordshire and the university? All of the different factors that are going to help the cluster grow. So things like basic things like links to Oxford. It's not straightforward. It should be really easy. So I think there are things that you can do on a very sort of practical sense to help Harwell and the space cluster up its game. I think my feeling is that actually the government's done a fantastic job, and it's now for the organisations, the businesses to actually sort of grasp this and really show what the cluster can do.
Taking Harwell, if you compare Harwell with other clusters, it's not so. Yes, it's a space cluster. It's not so different from other types of clusters. There was something there initially before it attracted government support, or of course, if you wind the clock back on Harwell, it was a sort of defence site, so I'm just invalidating my argument. But Tech City in London formed of its own accord, and it was only when it started to develop that it attracted further government funding. Harwell is in a similar stage. I think if you compared it to a team, it would be in a kind of storming phase. I don't think it's yet reached maturity in its ability to really accelerate the sector. I think the point is that there's a critical mass that the clusters need to get to before they really start performing, and it'll keep it as a sustainable offering. Michael's right that we still need to bring in some of the bigger companies. So we've got the big international institutions setting up, and some smaller companies and startups, thanks to some of the mechanisms on offer. But until the big guys come in as well, then we don't necessarily see that continued acceleration.
So Kronos Therapeutics, we're a clinical stage company. We focus on drug repurposing. We have a high throughput screen, a platform screening technology, and we've used the signals from that to get us to clinical stage. So we do the diseases of aging. I thought I'd get in before it's too late, to which the normal answer is it already is. We believe that the aging process biologically is highly regulated, that it doesn't need to be said, but it's growing massively in incidence now that we're handling what might be called the simpler diseases. And from a biological point of view, we believe this is conserved mechanistically in a network regulation. So we use various creatures, from yeast to worm to standard regulatory standard models to man, and we've gone most of the way along that chevron in the last 12 months. So what we have is a chronoscreen, which is a proprietary drug discovery platform. We've physically extracted the chronoscreen from the biochemistry department in the university in the last 9 months to its own facility. It's germane perhaps to the cluster discussion later on. We identify network effects on cellular aging. We've got our first lead compound into the clinic, phase 1 done, phase 2A very shortly to begin a late preclinical program in serious fatal neurodegenerative disease, which was funded by a TSB grant quite recently. Thank you, TSB, for sponsoring this. We also have a preclinical program in weight control. We found some very interesting network effects. All of these things are roughly associated with aging of cells. We've our screening facility on the outskirts of Oxford, Freeze Farm, we physically moved to. We still do work at Jane Maller's lab in biochemistry, and helped by the TSB grant, we completed a $13 million funding round in the 4th quarter of last year. So a quick flash of the team. I don't know how many thousands of years of experience that lot combined. You'll see a few names you know of course, and Helen Pullman up there, I've just stolen from the TSB Biomedical Catalyst. She's very well known in these parts. Helen joined us last week.
I think one of the important things is getting the right people. You're a small company, so everybody really counts. You can't carry any passengers. And Oxfordshire it's an attractive place to live. There's a lot going on in terms of both science and socially. But you've also drawn on the fact that it's an expensive place to live. And I think when we're all trying to employ young scientists, which we are, they're not particularly well paid compared to other professions, and certainly compared to the amount of education that they've had. And so they're often wanting to buy their first house, get onto the ladder, and this is a conflict. So in one way it's an attractive place to come, but it's difficult for people to get going. And I think the transport links, I would say, will remain important, because as we grow and grow the companies, yes, housing is important, but because we have a mobility tax in the UK, stamp duty, people have to travel. And just simple things like I employ young people, they're trying to get onto the Harwell campus. There's one bus in the morning, one bus in the evening. I'd like to improve my productivity by working shifts, even if we're only 6, because equipment is a constraint. I can't and have them on public transport, which is something that obviously is green and we would favour. The train, there's the odd random bus from Didcot train station to Harwell. So again, my people coming in from Reading and London. I lose flexibility for my workforce because the travel is inadequate today.
Okay, I eat my words. That's why I actually wanted to get the input of the panel, because they've got the direct experience with it.
Shall I handle?
Are there any other sort of issues in terms of getting funding initially? Was that a straightforward process?
I'm going to disagree again, because see, that's why I was selected, and say it's actually probably quite easy to get the very early stage funding. We do have the TSB located very locally down in Swindon, and they're very easy to engage with and discuss with. We do have support, certainly on the Harwell campus with STFC, they've done a lot of work bringing the Rainbow Seed Fund, connections with angel groups. So to get a small company like the one I run, often funded initially, good. But if we're wanting to grow larger companies, and I'm going to echo what Mark was saying here, what we need is to take those small companies into larger companies to increase the employment. Then it's that hop from the investors who've been happy to put in a small amount of money to then the large amount of money you need to do something far more ambitious. That is difficult, and that is not so well facilitated.
I think a really critical thing is business incubation and providing lab support services for basically startup companies. And I don't think that really exists. And thinking back, I think if I didn't have that, I was quite fortunate at the time when I started, because those incubation services were there. They were available on a very flexible basis, so I could just walk in, effectively off the street, start the company on paying a monthly rent for a supported lab with full business support on site. So a very cheap, cost-effective way to get established. And today, I don't think that kind of support is available for startup companies. So that's one thing. The other thing where I see a tremendous amount of, momentum is from the cluster itself. So as the cluster grows, more and more companies succeed, some fail, is that you get a tremendous amount of recycling in the area, all the way from equipment. We stripped out all the benches from the incubator and moved them to Milton Park when we first got our first lab. Also, people get recycled. So we employ people from other companies that perhaps haven't made it or gone through a 3-year cycle, or are just looking to move to another company without having actually to leave the area. So I think that's a very important thing, is that we see a lot of movement of highly skilled technical people from one company to another. And then also management of companies and entrepreneurs. When I started, there wasn't too many people around with a tremendous amount of experience. And again, as people go through this experience about starting companies, building companies, then that's, I think, invaluable in terms of building the cluster and just helping this momentum in terms of moving the bioscience community forward. I think Oxford as a brand is very attractive in terms of recruitment of people, particularly from overseas. So we don't really encounter any problems in terms of getting people to move into the area. So we haven't really experienced problems around the cost of living or the infrastructure or transport. But that might be partly because we're not a huge company and we're not recruiting on a mass scale. I think those kind of challenges are perhaps more of an impediment for the sort of companies that are moving to a mid-sized kind of level, as opposed to early stage and small companies.
Look at the home market in the NHS and say that looks awfully difficult. I think I'll go to the States first. I think what we've got to do within the AHSN is actually help companies get access to the home market in terms of adopting innovations at scale and pace into a clinical setting. And so one of the things we're going to concentrate on is how we can speed that up, make it more effective. It is a complex environment that companies have to go in, but from where I'm sitting, if we can get some small companies which actually can sell products into the NHS, generate revenues, then that's a win-win situation all around, and that's something we've really got to push forward. That also helps provide a platform for those companies then to diversify internationally and sell overseas. The other thing I would say also is from a perspective of the product offering, particularly in the healthcare spaces, there are opportunities to engage with clinicians within the NHS, within academia, to understand what the problems are on the floor and how you can actually find the solutions to that. And so I'm keen to see it coming together with industry, NHS and clinicians and academics to understand the real issues and then finding solutions to those problems through multidisciplinary teams. And that's necessarily got to include the academics, the clinicians, but the investor community as well as the large industry community. And I think if we can start to bring those elements together more clearly and in a more focused way, then I think that will help to drive innovation, and hopefully one will see the benefits in terms of more successful companies and those companies being able to grow at scale and pace.
That actually possibly in the UK our view of what a cluster is a little bit distorted from the rest of the world's view. So we're saying in the session this morning that the fact that Harwell is slightly outside of Oxford city centre is a barrier, and yet in the Silicon Valley, you can drive from one side to the other and it takes you 3 hours to get there. So my question, to everyone is, if we're going to be globally competitive as individual clusters, but as part of UK PLC, how can we work, between clusters in Oxford and clusters in the northwest, clusters in Scotland? How can we work together a bit more so that we are globally competitive rather than kind of quite a closed-in view individually?
Within Oxfordshire, but you're absolutely right. I think for us to sort of collectively actually do even better, we need to sort of further closer relationships with the other areas within the UK. And I think in terms of our global position, that will put us in a much bigger situation to compete with San Francisco, to compete with Boston, to compete with Berlin. So yes, I completely agree.
Part of what we've been doing within the Oxfordshire Lab and the whole idea of trying to build those network navigator teams is that one of multiple initiatives across the whole country under the Regional Growth Fund, so regional growth hubs. And what we're trying to do within those, again, is take the life sciences cluster here, connected to other parts of the country, so to Manchester, etc. And within my own area, digital, and make those connections happen. So absolutely, we need to do more of that. And hopefully that's going to come through some of the government funding that we've got to make that happen.
Yeah.
Sorry,
we're all agreed. I think in terms of the actual sort of work being done within the cluster has been very good. And in terms of results to date, these have been really high. But I think we do need to adopt a slightly different strategy. The strategy might get you to where you are right now successfully, but is it the right strategy to take you to the next level? I think not. And I think there are sort of several areas where we really do need to start thinking about what we can do better. It does seem to me that the whole infrastructure side of the issue is bigger than I actually thought it was. And I can only really rely on people who've actually been there, who are experiencing it. But in terms of getting the sort of travel, the cost of living, access to work is the main issue which we face. On the back of that, of course, well, yes, we do need additional sort of laboratory space, office space, but these setups are coming along in the next sort of 2 or 3 years.